Hello, everyone. Welcome back once again to the VOV Network and our live stream here on Saturday. And we're going to dive right into it. What we're going to be getting into today is the final T in our 5T series, and that's talking about trust. And very broad topic. I'm going to go deep, talk about various things, answer some questions that we think people really don't think about when they think about trust, such as, is it more of a feeling or is trust actually an emotion? And then also one thing, and I know a few of the members here maybe disagree with a little, and we'll talk that through as well, is trust something that should be given automatically, or is it something that you should earn? Those are different subjects, the different topics. We're going to dive deep into talking about ways to cultivate, grow trust, both on the giving side, the receiving side, and also trust within yourself. So stick around. Let's get into it. Well, good morning, ladies. How are you doing this morning?
Great, doing great.
Good
Good,
morning.
good, good.
Doing well.
Doing well? Good, good, good. Welcome. So we're going to dive right into this morning. We've got a lot to talk about and some differing opinions, which is good because we're never always going to agree on everything, and that's the way it should be. And our subject for today, we're talking about cultivating trust. And obviously, when that word comes out, people instantly go to the place of trusting someone else, right? But it's actually much, much, much deeper than that from a trust standpoint, because yes, trusting some other people is important, but it also has to do with some of the things or elements in our life that we either have trust or comfort with. And then it also has a lot to do, and people don't realize how much who they trust or how they trust has to do with the trust they have and the confidence they have within themselves. So we're going to dive into and kind of talk about all those things. So that being said, let's get into it. The other thing I want to mention really quick for our audience is we want to make this as interactive as we possibly can. So if there are any comments, questions, things you'd like to share as we go through this live session today, please don't hesitate to drop your comments, and we look forward to that.
Absolutely.
Right. So let's get in. I'm going to bring in the presentation and we'll go to the first slide right away and really just kind of talk about what the definition of trust is. So, what is trust? So, from a definition standpoint, it says firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. Right. So, again, kind of broad, but also very specific because they're using some, I think, some key words into that description. Reliability, truth, ability, and strength. So that means that you as an individual have either one of those things or a combination of those different elements in another person or in a certain situation or in something else. That is it the feeling that you have? And that's one of the first questions. Or is it an emotion? So, and when I say is trust a behavior versus an emotion, what's the difference between those two? Who has any feedback or thoughts on when I say is trust a behavior or is it an emotion?
Well, these are very relevant questions when it comes to trust. But there's so many levels to peel when you think about how you base how trust looks in your life. And in my opinion, is in terms of behavior or emotion, is situational. It can be acted out or it can be unspoken. So for me, it's both.
Got it. Okay. Tressena, what do you think?
And
Well,
welcome back.
Yes, and
thank
welcome
you.
back.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, especially in this conversation, because trust is something that I've wrestled with from a few angles in the last few years. But I would definitely say trust is, I don't believe in emotion. I think trust is too weighty of a matter to be an emotion. And if we attach the value of trust, whether it's with ourselves or someone else, to an emotion, we're always going to fall short in really seeing how can I apply this in a way that is going to be significant, because we know in every relationship, whether it's a romantic one or a business one, that trust is at the center of it. Can I trust you to show up and do what it is that we've agreed to, or what you said you would do. So I don't see it as an emotion. I don't think it can handle that. And as a behavior, I did look at trust and character being tied very close. And so we can say it's a behavior. However, um, I don't think our behavior, or let me say it this way, I think our behaviors will show up in a way that says, I can trust that person, or I can't trust that person. So
Okay.
the emotion part is too heavy, but the behavior definitely, because I think when we start to dive into this conversation a little bit more, we'll see how trust is connected to behavior.
Got it.
Yeah.
So let me add a third word to that. So I said trust, is it a behavior or an emotion? What if I also said what if it's a behavior, a feeling, or an emotion? How does that change, or does that impact what you think about trust?
I would side with behavior and feeling. I completely, and I guess when I said both in terms of behavior and emotional, I mean the acting out of it. But in terms of behavior and feeling, you can feel like you trust someone based on what they have shown you.
Okay.
And we'll get into the given or earned part of that. So I would say behavior definitely it's a heavy weighted subject. So I would say behavior and feeling for me. I feel like I can trust you based on what you've shown me.
Okay.
So they tie
And
in. The behavior and the feeling tie in.
so it's two things. So basically, what I'm hearing is it's their behavior, but then it's your feeling that you
Right.
get from it.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. All right. Tressena, you have anything you want to add on that?
No, I like that, Bridget. I think that's really spot on because I don't know if this is for us as women, but your feelings, not something you let drive you, but it's definitely something that is an indicator. Do I feel like I can trust this person? And so that's huge.
Mhm.
Or do I feel like I can trust myself? And I
Right.
can't
Right.
wait to
Right.
share that
Right.
aspect of this conversation, because I had a conversation with myself on that thing. Can I trust myself in this area? Yeah.
You're right.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So let me shovel even some more on top of this. All right. So I did a little bit of research, and like I said, we're going to go deep on this one because I think it's very relevant.
Yeah.
It
So I did
is.
some research to say what is the difference from, and I won't say clinically to a degree, but as a psychology or the world would describe it, between feeling and emotion. What is at a root level, right? So feeling is, and this keeping it as simple as we possibly can. Feeling is conscious. Emotion can be either subconscious or conscious. So basically, if you're feeling something, it is a conscious awareness or thought that you're having. Whereas an emotion can be running in the background and you not even know it in your
Mhm.
subconscious, or it can be in your conscious. So that is the primary difference between feelings and emotions.
Mhm.
So, which is very interesting. And that's why one of the examples I always talk about with feeling is how many times we probably all had it happen or we witnessed it, where someone gets a minor injury, they cut their finger, blah, 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 but they don't know it. They didn't, and then all of
Mhm.
a sudden it's like, where is blood coming from, right? And then that in that moment, ouch, it hurts because that feeling of pain doesn't come because you were not conscious of it. But the moment you become conscious of it, that's when you then have the feeling. So that's a
Mhm.
great example to say that's when a good way to look at feeling versus emotion.
Okay.
Adding that on top of it, how does that change your view on trust?
I would just off the cuff, I would just say it's situational. It just depends on the situation. You can in a relationship, someone can do this terrible act, and you trusted them, and you don't put a lot of thought in it, but at that very moment, you feel this anger, and you
Mhm.
can't. I will never trust you. But then
Mhm.
once you kind of think about everything that has happened and your part in it and their part in it, then you go, well, okay, I can see how this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can trust them again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So is that the feeling versus emotion part and trying to reconcile your way through that, you think?
Right.
Okay. That makes sense. I totally agree with that. Um, so that's I think a very important distinction to bring in when we are talking about trust and having to get a better understanding of that there are layers and levels, and then obviously situations are going to have an impact on um, how we go about applying the different things that happen in it, right?
Yes.
But that's the key one. I wanted to bring that up about conscious versus subconscious and with the feeling versus emotion, because that is, I think, one of the drivers that we really need to be aware of, not
Yeah.
just for our discussion purposes today, but in life and as we move forward and talk about the other things that we are going to share as we run through our session today. So let's move to the second question, where we talk about, should trust be given or should it be earned?
Now, you and I have talked about this.
Have we really?
We've been talking about this since May, um, about this trust thing since we started these teas, and we differ
In what
on
way?
that, which we will find that others may differ as well.
Right.
I believe that it is given. That's just based on how I've been brought up, my situations, family background, just everything, my experiences, and so we did that. We talked about the concept of the credits, right? You
We did.
give. We talked about you either give people credits, and as they do anything or whatever to lose those credits, you take them away,
Mhm.
or you keep the credit, and as they do things to earn your trust, you give them to them. Well, I believe that you give them to them, and then when they lose your trust, you take them away.
Okay.
You believe in the opposite. And so I believe that I will trust you until you give me a reason not to. And
Okay.
that's just, I've always dealt with any type of relationship.
Got it.
Because you have to, for me, I would always walk around not trusting people and them having to build or perform or whatever to earn my trust. And some people just don't know that that's what they have to do.
Okay. Fair enough. Tressena, what do you want to share on that?
I think it's both. And along with what Bridget is saying, when you think, and Bridget and I are both teachers, so I'm come from that angle. When a kid shows up in the classroom, if we just tell the kid, when you start off school, you get 100. Everybody's at an A, or not 100, let me say an A. And then every assignment you turn in or don't turn in will change that A to another grade. Now, if you turn it in, you'll stay there. So when you think of trust is something that you give someone, right? It doesn't have to be earned. However, however, there are some instances where if you and let me say this real quick when we look at trust, I want to say that trust is a repeated reality, is how I've heard it. So how I see you repeatedly showing up, I can trust you. So if you come into my sphere or circle and I realize that something that has been said or something that I've witnessed has not allowed me to have this rock solid trust in your repeated reality, you're gonna have to earn it. I can't just
Mhm.
give you that, and it wouldn't be wise on my part to say I've seen these areas consistently in a person's life that I've had to question. So you don't instantly get my trust. You're gonna have to earn it, and it's not from the place of and I just want to say this from performing, because I don't want anybody to feel like, I don't think any of us need to show up and feel like we need to perform. But
Mhm.
I think in building relationships or connections, there is a place where you may have to come in and show that I can be trusted. This may have been the repeated reality for years or a season of my life where I did certain things. but I'm a different person. So there's no
Mhm.
performing here, but it is the point to be made that if this has been your track record, so to speak, I
Mhm.
need to see that I can trust you. And so you don't instantly get my trust. So I think it's both. It's a little bit of both. And it just depends. And
Great.
like Bridget was saying, it's situational.
Okay.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, Tressena. If you have a record where you have untrusting behavior, I am not gonna go into it like, oh yeah, well that was a pass. I trust you. Oh no, you're gonna have to show me that I can trust
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
again. So yeah, it's both.
Yeah.
Got it.
And Bryan, now your thoughts.
So my thoughts are different. We'll go with that, but not necessarily drastically, but just framed in a different way. So, I for me, I actually, and I, the analogy that I actually come up with for it is a firewall, right? So I actually have a firewall in life in general, and people, no matter who or where, they start on the outside of the firewall, and then they have to call it a filter, if you will, and then they have to prove or show that they're worthy to be let through the firewall, to get to a certain place of being a little closer or in the circle or whatever term you want to use. But that is how I go about it. So yes, is that the opposite of, giving them the 100 credits right out of the box? Yes, it
Mhm.
is. But then that's the way I have chosen to kind of go through that process. So that's my first line filter or firewall or whatever you want to call it. And then people have to show that they're worthy to be a trusted website and pass through that firewall, basically. And that's my approach to it.
Uh, has that kept your circle small? Has it? I mean,
Intentionally small, yes.
let's just move on. This conversation can last long. It has
Well,
lasted.
We'll
I
see.
like that Bryan said intentional, because when it comes to, I want to share this. And it's a scripture, y'all. It says, guard your heart, for out of it flows the issues of life, right? So if you always leave your heart open, and this doesn't necessarily have to be a relationship with like a romantic
Right.
relationship or something. It could be with anybody, because whoever we allow into our circles, there's a part of us in our heart that you will be close to, that you can affect. And if you leave that open for everybody, there can be some injury. There can be some places where you may have an ouch. Did you really just say that or do that? So I think it's important that
Mhm.
we are intentional on who we allow in, especially when you're thinking about trust, because it's so valuable in our connections that if I'm just allowing, and I think maybe this is a good place to bring it in. I've gone through a divorce, and twice. And so I told myself, I don't know if I trust myself to choose again. So I started looking at me. I was like, I don't know that I trust my decision making. And it's not that these were horrible guys at all. They're wonderful, but there were just some character flaws that showed up, that did not sustain us. And even through periods of grace, right, seasons of walking through that, I realized I don't know if I trust myself. So I was like, we just gonna put that on pause for right now. I'm all right being single. I'm gonna just sit in that place. That is me being intentional about the trust within myself that I didn't know I had. But then when it's about giving to others, can I trust you? And if you don't fall in a place where I can, you don't get through that firewall, it's okay. We need to be intentional. And sometimes having a small circle may be beneficial for a season of your life. For me, especially while I'm working through, do I trust myself in this area to choose again? So I like that point you made, Bryan, because it's okay to
Yeah,
be intentional. Yeah.
and that's an excellent reference when, because that's something I want to talk about when we get a little bit deeper into some of the other slides. We are going to be talking more about the trust in self, and as you said,
Mhm.
Tressena, that ability to feel comfortable that I don't even trust myself to make these decisions, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how that plays out from a mental and emotional standpoint,
Mhm.
and where the root causes and beliefs and those different things come from, and then how to better manage your way through that as well. So we'll be
Yeah.
talking about all those things as we move forward. So I think we kill that horse. We can move on to the next horse,
You think we
which
did?
really which really is what we were just saying. Do you have trust in yourself, right? And
Yeah.
that I think is the one that gets overlooked probably the most, because as I said when we first started our conversation today, when the word trust hits the table, we instantly look at it outbound, right? Who do
Mhm.
I trust? This person? Do I trust that person? Do I trust this situation? But a lot of that, you have to understand, is driven by your own internal comforts within yourself, right? And what you trust in and don't trust in. So one of the things I want to bring up when we talk about this, and then we'll get off this slide and we'll move on, um, is the concepts of certainty versus uncertainty. And that really is what, in some ways, even trust is related to. How certain am I in a certain thing? How uncertain is a certain thing? And it could be a person, it can be a thing, it could be a situation, whatever it might be. Example: if we all jumped on a plane right now and went out, we're going to go skydiving, right? What will be going through our minds from a trust, certainty, or uncertainty standpoint, right? So, am I certain that the parachute's going to open? Yeah, maybe, right? I mean, there's so all these things you're processing your way through as you go through that process. So, a lot of what is behind trust is your level of either how certain you feel about it, how uncertain you feel about it. And it's a sliding scale. So it can change. It can be, as you said, well, for one person or group, that slide might be all the way to this side. So you're very certain. That's the way you feel about it. Other situations, it could be more uncertain. So I think a lot of the root cause, and something we don't think about in our lives so much, is that is one of the biggest motivators about how we react to things, is our level of certainty and uncertainty in whatever it may be. So that's it's just something I wanted to believe in, because certainty and uncertainty actually apply to trust, it
Hmm.
applies to faith, and it applies to belief, right? So I want to throw that on the table before we move forward.
Definitely.
Questions, comments, emotional outbursts, anybody?
I don't have an emotional outburst. No. Just, and I know we spent a lot of time on this first slide, but we didn't kind of dive into trusting yourself. And I just want to say this, just to be transparent, and so that the audience can kind of open up as well. That was a big one for me. Most of my life, and I think I've talked about it in different sessions, that most of my life, my adult life, I had an issue with trusting in myself. And in a number of sessions, I've talked about making decisions out of fear. So much so that fast forward, I had a hard time making decisions, and I asked this person and this person and this person what should I do about my own life decisions, because I did not make decisions in the past, and when I did make decisions, it was out of fear. So I was scared of I was scared of a yes or a no from me, or
Mhm.
or right from me. And so I did not, and I had to realize I didn't trust in myself. So I had to walk that out. And some people don't realize that when they're having a hard time trusting, making decisions, it's sometimes because we don't trust ourselves, and we haven't met that yet, that we haven't admitted that yet, that we just don't trust ourselves, not the situation that's going on, or to make a decision in a situation. We just don't trust ourselves to make that move or make that decision. And so I had to walk that out. I had to get healed from that. I had to become more self-aware, and we're going to talk about that later. I had to know that trusting in myself, I had to trust in myself and my abilities, definitely in my abilities. And so then,
Did she freeze? Did she freeze?
Yeah, it's frozen on my end.
Oh, anyway, she'll be back with us in just a moment. But I agree. There you go.
pause.
There you go.
I just pause, and they'll go like, well, what's wrong? You didn't say anything. I just pause so that I can give myself some time to make a decision.
Bridget, thanks for sharing. You actually kind of froze a little bit there, but you are absolutely right. And the reason I
Look like
put that on
look like I'm having some connection problems.
the reason I even put that on there about trusting yourself is, I think, in a lot of ways, that's step one, right? Because we can talk about all the other things, but your decision making is so rooted in
Mhm.
self and starting inside and internally and what the motivators are and all those different things. So actually taking that step back to do that evaluation of self as Bridget just talked about, so that you can get to a place of true comfort, so that then you are making better decisions when who you trust, how you trust, and all those different things, because it's going to impact your life in various ways. So I
Mhm.
think that's a key area of self-awareness is, and that's one of the things that we talk about a lot here on the VOV network, is there's a lot of this is about just becoming aware, and especially self-aware. And that's a key component, I think, that we really want people to kind of to grasp, because it is not all about the outbound piece of trust.
Mhm.
A lot of it has to do with that internal piece as well. So
Absolutely.
before we move on, and if this is your first time joining us, let's do a quick roundtable and just kind of introduce everyone. My name is Bryan Murray. I'm the founder of the Village of Voices and the VOV Network. And our primary mission is to help you cultivate, enhance, and preserve self excellence. And that's what we're focused to. I'm joined today by two wonderful co hosts. I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Hello, I am Bridgit Kinney. I am the founder and director of Building Bridges Mentor and Outreach Program and Be Beautiful Girls.
Hi, I'm Tressena Jones. I'm the founder and CEO, and I like to say it this way, the Community Engagement Officer of Halo Foundation. And I'm also a small business owner, excited, just launched my new business. This is always a great conversation. And so I'm glad to be a part of this conversation on trust today.
Excellent. Thank you both for joining. And we're going to move on to the next slide. We'll bring that in and get that going.
Okay, just as Brian has mentioned so many times before, Brene Brown is my go-to person. And so I'm always encouraged by her quotes. And so what does it mean to trust? Trust is a product of vulnerability that grows over time and requires work, attention, and full engagement. Trust isn't a grand gesture, it's a growing marble collection.
Mhm.
And so from that, I got that it's just like any other human act, love, etc., that affects others. It takes work, and it's not one.
Mhm.
It's not a one and done. You're right. It grows over time, and it becomes this beautiful piece of life and a work of art between yourself, your life, and others, and the people that you trust.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And the key word is probably vulnerability. And we've talked at length about that in some previous sessions, just the importance of that, and how it, it's obviously brings about some fear for a lot of people, right? Because they don't want to be open and exposed. But it is a key component to
Hmm.
truly being able to trust, and to give it freely, and to be comfortable within yourself when you do that, is getting to a place with vulnerability that you're okay. And then I do like the part here where it says it's a growing marble collection. And it takes me back to, childhood. And we all had, the little bag of the different marbles. And there was these certain ones of different colors and different things that you were really proud of, because they had a huge representation of who you are and what you are about. And that's exactly what she's referring to here. And I think that's very choice words in this quote.
Hmm.
The part that stands out to me is it grows over time.
Mhm.
And when you think about whether it's trust with yourself or others, it's this repeated reality, something that I can see over and over and over. And so it does grow over time. And that's why when we said earlier, it's both what was that?
Behavior and feeling. I mean, most.
Mm, no, I forgot. Oh goodness. But anyway, what I'm saying is it is both given and earned.
Okay.
That's
Mhm.
the part I was trying to say, because
Mhm.
when it grows over time, you can see I've given it to you, but then over time, can I trust that I can continue staying in that place with you, or do we need to revisit what it is that is going on? So it's a really good point, because people show up and mistakes are made, and when we look at the value of trust in our relationships in whatever aspect, it grows over time, and we need to be comfortable with those places where it may not always be what we thought it would be, but we can continue with the process and reevaluate what it looks like.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's an ever evolving thing, and I think that's the other piece of
Yeah.
it. Just like anything in any relationship, right? If you go into it and you say, all right, this is how it's set up and this is how it's framed, and I'm done. Well, no, that's not how
Yes.
it works, right?
Yep.
It's ever evolving, ever changing, because our environment changes, we change as
Yes.
individuals. Everything's going on with that, so it is something that you do have to be aware of and work with to continue to maintain. So I think that's a key
Mhm.
component.
Definitely. Definitely.
So let's go on to the next slide and continue to talk about that. And
Okay. Elements of the trusting behavior. So, do you display these trusting behaviors? Being a good listener, eliminate the blame game and tit for tat, cultivate self awareness, and being transparent. Anybody want to start and how this resonates with you or the people that you trust?
I'll definitely jump in talking about obviously self-awareness is a key one for me, and I harp on that a lot because and that's a lot of what our focus is right here, because just a true believer that um, a lot of the things that you can do to impact change in your life to make those differences start within. It's not about what's out; it's what's inside of you. And so self-awareness and cultivating that is, I think, a huge key. And as we've already talked about with trust, it plays into that. But before I hand it over, do want to go back to the top one, and that is being a good listener, um, which is a skill. It just doesn't happen overnight for a lot of people. So it is a skill. So it's something you have to work at. And let me even dig just a little bit deeper with that, because there's levels of listening, right? So listening just to be able to respond is what most people do. So they're hearing,
Mhm.
but in the process of hearing, they're actually already formulating their response, which means they're not actually listening, if you really think about that, right? Because they're just listening to say, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, sure, let me get to a spot where I get my word in because I need to say what my response is. Uh, what you want to be able to do is actually hear the other person's thoughts, comments, whatever it is that they're sharing with you as a whole, right? Then process it, then respond, right? So that is the process that you should go through. But most people don't, because we feel like we've got to have this instantaneous response to all things. So as being a better listener, being a good listener, is to learn to have that patience to actually capture it all first, then process it, then give your response. So I just wanted to share that.
Um, I'll say I am not, I have not been in the past a good listener, even though I thought I was, because I heard everything that you said. Um, and that is the work that I'm doing on myself is, and think I have mentioned this before more than once, that people and even my grown children will say, wait, mama, listen to what I have to say, because the mother in me wants to solve it right away, either because I already know what we should do and I already know what I need to respond, or I just don't feel like hearing the whole story. Um, and so that has kind of spilled over into every other conversations that I've had with other people. And so I have been trying to groom. I have been working on grooming myself to just listen, and the people can trust you when they know that you're listening to learn about what they're saying and
Mm-hmm.
not putting a lot of energy into listening to respond.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm learning to be more purposeful in my listening. Um, I know that people will trust me when they know that I'm listening to learn and to hear what they're saying and understand what they're saying, not to just to give a response. And it used to drive me kind of crazy when I would talk to people and I would give them my problem or who's ever problem, and they just wouldn't say anything. And then I would say, well, you're not going to say anything. Bryan is a perfect example of that. And I would say, you're not going to say anything. And they'd be like, well, let me get back with you.
Mhm.
So not being self-aware, the first thing you would be start thinking about, well, what did I say? What did I do? Well, what happened? What's wrong?
Mhm. Mhm.
Really, they was just purposeful listening and being a listener and sorting through that so that they can respond in a way that came from what they thought and not just what you said and what they heard.
Mhm.
So that is my spill on being a good listener. I am learning that more and more every day.
Absolutely. Tressena, what on the list? Anything you want to tackle on that one?
I really thought about this one, and I thought the eliminating the blame game and tit for tat. So I taught middle school, and you can see some of all of the most irritating and frustrating behaviors in middle schoolers. As an adult, when I started to see that in working relationships and even in marriage, I thought that's definitely not a place that I want to show up, because you don't even feel safe with a person who's always looking to blame someone else
Mhm.
or doing a tit for tat. And I would always challenge myself in that place, like, listen, if you got to say, it's me, so that you can just stop it before it even gets started. I rather would do that instead of going through that whole process of, you did this, you did that. And I'm like, I'll just take one for the team. That's kind of how I see it. Because as adults, you want to have trusting relationships and interactions with people. But if we are looking at doing a tit for tat, well, they did this or said this, and it may have just been not an intentional or malicious thing, but if you are in that place where you're doing a tit for a tat, then I'm not going to feel safe with you.
Mhm.
I'm not going to trust that I'm safe with you. Or
Mhm.
the blame game, because then you're not taking accountability or responsibility for what you need to change. And I tell you, those years in the classroom working with young kids and seeing, because it's okay for them, right? Because we're helping, to mold and shape them into young people and young adults, right? But when I started to see that in my working relationships, and in marriage, I was like, no, this is not a good thing, because you just don't really feel that that person is valuing the level of trust. And that's
Mhm.
another thing, I don't think we talk a lot about what trust looks like. And for me, I attach it to safe. The word
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
safe. Can I be safe with you, especially if I've given my heart to you?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mhm.
And so those are two of the things that I really thought was important to touch on, because we don't always see that about ourselves, and we do need to have those in our circle that will point it out to us. And like I said, being in that classroom with those kids and seeing this is what middle school kids did, 12, 13, 14. You 30. Nuh-uh, cut that out. You 45 or you 60. Like, why are you still doing that? And
Mhm.
so that's kind of the place where I am. But I would hope that people see also that you can trust me, that when I point it out to you, it's not that I'm pointing it out so that I can be judgmental. It's just a place to say, hey, have you thought about what you're doing here? Because this is what I'm seeing. And so
Mhm.
that's another level of trust. I think that's the outward position of it, that I'm going to share what I'm seeing with someone else so then they can do the inner work. And maybe they're not self aware in that moment. But that is the two that I wanted to talk about, this blame game and tit for tat. And I'll be honest, y'all, to see that in adults, especially in relationships, right? I don't understand that, because if the value of your relationship is we're connected, I want this to go the long haul, why would I find myself blaming you or doing tit for tat? Like, that undermines everything about us being able to be safe with one another and continue in this journey together. So, yeah, those two right there was what really stood out to me.
Can I
Absolutely.
respond before I burst and my thought? Um,
Yes.
so first of all, the what you said about the blame game and the trusting piece in a relationship, I thought what the first thing came to my mind was, if you know that I love you and I know that you love me in any type of relationship, if I mention to you, if I come to you and say, hey, I noticed this,
Mhm.
maybe this would be something that you need to talk, think about, or try make some adjustments. If you know that I care about you and I would not do anything to harm you,
Yeah.
then you should, if you trust that, then you should know that, hey, I'm telling you this because it's of your best interest. So maybe I need to step back and look at that and not respond, well, you do this,
Mhm. Yep.
because that's not trust at that point. So
Yeah.
then we need to see, do you really trust me? You need to think about, do I really trust you then? Because now I think that you're challenging me, you're assaulting me verbally. So do I really trust you? Then you need to think about that in your relationship. Do I really trust that person? Because now I think they're assaulting me, and by saying I do something. And then in the tit for tat part, when we up and accept our mishaps and acknowledge our role in a
Mhm.
situation, it allows others to trust us, and then we can start resolving. And I
Yeah.
use tit for tat, a concept in problem solving with my girls. You cannot solve a problem if you both going tit for tat, because
Right.
that can last forever. Well, you did that. Well, you did that. Well, you did that.
Right.
So at this point, the problem is way down the street. We have gotten so far away from the problem, because now we're all the way up here to some other stuff that had nothing to do with the problem. Because now we're talking about all the other things. So when you don't go to tit for tat and you say, I felt that you did this way to me, and then I respond however I respond, the way I made you feel.
Mm.
Because this is what we're talking about, how I made you feel. We're not talking about how me telling you how I felt made you feel.
Right.
Right.
This is about how you made me feel. So you respond with how I said you made me feel. And then at another time, we could talk about another thing that happened that made you feel a certain way. But we don't go back and forth about how I made you feel and how you made me feel and how I made you feel. That's a tit for tat. And so when we can acknowledge our mistakes, acknowledge our roles in the relationship or the conflict in that relationship, then it allows other people to trust you.
Mhm.
I can tell you how you made me feel,
Mhm.
and then I know that you'll listen
Yeah.
and learn about what happened, and then you'll respond accordingly, and then we can solve the problem. Not, well, if I tell them, then they're gonna tell me what I did, and then I'm gonna tell them what they did, and we're gonna go back and forth. That is not a trusting behavior.
Right. Right.
Okay,
Absolutely.
do that.
You feel better now? Okay, good. So I'm glad you brought that out, because and this is what when we started this session, we know this is one of those ones, even when we were putting it together, we're like, man, this thing might end up being pretty long, but because it's so relevant, but it's also
Mhm.
a very deep subject, right? And again, people don't realize, I think, the depth of when you start talking about getting into trust and how it can play back and forth in many different ways. Bridgit, what you were just speaking of obviously has a lot to do with the perception versus reality piece of it, which is something we
Mhm.
talk about a lot, especially when it comes to, as you were saying, it made me feel this way. You said X or did Y or whatever it might be. And from that, I felt this, or, these my feelings associated with it. And the other person might have totally missed it because their
Mhm.
perception of what they said or the situation or whatever else might be totally different than the reality of how you actually felt it, right? But those are the conversations that we have to have so that we can try to remain on the same sheet of music, right? Because if we don't, that's when, as you said, when you're talking about your girls, you get way down the road, but the problem's way back here. You're miles away from it now. So how can you solve something when now you're not even in the same realm with it anymore?
Mhm.
So the key is to address it. B, address it early, and that's a whole nother conversation. I think that's another session we can get into about how sometimes people will let it brew and brew and
Mhm.
brew, and then the eruption happens, and it's a whole nother story. um, And, there's that whole thing people talk about, well, I don't want to nag or be that person. But if you're holding it in, then that also has probably worse ramifications long term. So
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to throw that out. Anything else on this before we move on to talking about some of the distrusting behaviors?
No.
All right, let's get into that. So I'm going to cover talking about some of the distrusting behaviors. And I did this slide purposely with check boxes, right? And we're specifically going to focus on these, thinking of them as, do I display, act out, whatever other term you want to use, any of these particular behaviors? And if I do, you get a checkbox. So check the box, because that's a self-awareness thing that we want to talk through when we talk about trust, right? So first thing, and I say they, and again, that's because I'm speaking out. But think of this internally too. You're asking yourself these questions: do you anticipate betrayal, and always see the negative, and especially see the negative first? So if you are looking at everything and just automatically going, "Yep, going to be betrayed," it's going to be a negative, it's going to be an absolute mess. You often find, as it says, you find yourself assuming the worst, noticing people's weaknesses whether rather than their strengths. And again, a session, if you haven't watched it, that we have, that Bridgit and I did, and we talked about uh, no such thing as perfect, basically, because there's nothing's going to be perfect. So if you're looking at an individual and what you're focused on is their weaknesses and how they may be imperfect, you're always going to find those things, right?
Mhm.
And that's a conscious choice to choose whether to um, focus in on that. How
Mm-hmm.
about take that same energy, because obviously you've figured out, you got a keen eye to be able to figure it out. Focus on the strengths that the person has and not their weaknesses. Uh, Not to say that you can't bring their weaknesses up and help them work to be better in those areas, especially if you're in a relationship with this person. But the key is, don't harp on one side of the fence always,
Mhm.
and do some good on the other side. And I think that's the key component to that. Ladies, what do you think?
I will say this: it's so draining. Just right off the, it's so draining to anticipate betrayal and see the negative in everything and in most people. It's just very draining, and not just for you. I mean, not just for others with that you come across, but for yourself. And it's
Mhm.
sad. It's situational, and it's sad because and why I say it's situational, because if friends hurt you in the past, then when you meet other people and try to build another circle, your guard is up the whole time
Mm,
because they hurt me in the past. So these people are probably going to hurt me too.
mhm,
You leave a job where coworkers were bullying you. So you go to another job and now you won't go in the break room because when you was in the break room before, they were whispering. So every time you pass by somebody and they're whispering, you're thinking about they're talking about you.
mhm, mm,
Um, and so the assumption is just draining. And so
mhm,
it's hard, and I know that it's hard, and people may say, well, that's easy for you to say because you're not on that side of the coin. It's really hard, especially if you come from a place where people have hurt you.
mhm.
But if you think about the energy that it takes to do that, you'll kind of free yourself from it.
Mhm.
Nobody knows you're doing it but you.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Tressena, what do you think?
I love that Bridget brought out a point that it's draining because we talk a lot about our energy, right?
Mhm,
And so if you are giving all of your energy to finding the negative or seeing the negative or assuming the worst, you have drained all of your resources for that person or that experience or place to show up, and you can receive that not out of the negative space. And
mhm,
so what I had to learn is you will have to make a conscious decision, especially if there has been hurt or injury before, to say that will not rule me, especially if there's still emotions attached to that, right? The healing process is still active and engaged. Hopefully, that's the place we find ourselves. But if you are in that place, you have to be intentional and say, no, I'm not going to see this situation as the same experience that I did the others. That is a place where you have to be self-aware,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
because it would be easy to look outward and say, well, I bet they're going to be like this, or, I've had this situation before. No, if you are self-aware, you can say that may have been a previous or prior experience with a person or a place, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean this is going to be similar. And even when you see some of the same things cropping up, that may be similar, because the nature of people is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So one of the things we have to realize is you may encounter a similar situation again, but it
Mhm.
doesn't mean you have to see the negative. You can say, I know from the last experience what happened, what it was like. What am I going to do different now? And I think that's the self-awareness piece that really brings us to a place where we're doing our work.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Because no matter what the circumstances may be, the environment may be, you're the person that is showing up. So have you done your work so that you can offer something different? Maybe
Mhm.
those people don't see it. Maybe they're not aware. And so if you respond and come in and do the same thing everybody else has done out of a negative experience, I'm a teacher. So I'm like, you're missing an opportunity to teach them something about what it is they don't see. And because I give people grace, right? And I learned this through my marriage, the second one, that you got to give people grace, even in their
Mhm.
failures and their mistakes, right? And I want to be a safe place. I want to be a place where people feel like, oh, I can trust this, or I can trust that about her. And so that is where offering grace in those situations, instead of looking at the negative and pointing out everything, it's like walk with people for a season, right? And then when the connection is close and the relationship is built, and you feel like there's some trust that has been established, then you can say, hey, had you seen this or thought about this? But it's not that you've led out with the negative or
Correct.
you assume the worst. You have just been aware because you see it. We can't hide from things that are right there in front of us, but we don't have to lead from that place.
Very
Um,
good.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Thank you for that. So let's dive in and go to the next one here. So next thing on the list, feel like they must do everything. So basically, this is a big trust issue, and this is basically where you look at a situation and you go, you know what? I don't really trust this person's going to do it or do it to my level of satisfaction. So you don't even give them the opportunity. You just
Mm.
take over and you do it all, right? Um, and it's a very common thing that happens.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that drives that is in there may be some perfectionist pieces in that and some perfectionism driving it. But a lot of that even can be just rooted in lack of trust, right? Not trusting that the person is going to do it to your satisfaction. And again, that's a self-awareness, self-reflection thing. Is that really what it is? Or are you just maybe that personality in some ways who wants to be in control and doesn't even give them the opportunity to step forward and do the things that they need to do. What do you ladies think?
Um, you're right on both of those counts. I can personally attest to this because in the past, I felt that it was important um, to me that I just took care of it, right? I didn't think other people really thought it was that important. What was important to me was not that important to them. So I just took care of it. But I also found in that is that I had built my circle around people that it wasn't important to them. And subconsciously, I knew that. So I just did it. So I had to make the shift, right? I had to become self-aware and see how I fit in this circle of people.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I need to take myself out of that circle and put myself in and build another circle, put myself in another circle, sphere, or what have you. So I had to kind of do some internal work.
Mm-hmm.
Why did I feel like I had to do this all the time? Why did I have to do the work all the time? Why did I have to take over the project? Why did I have to start the project? Why was my patience so short with everything that was going on that I felt like, well, let me do it because they're not going to do it. And when I started to do the work internally, I found out that, yeah, people really didn't think it was important.
Mhm.
And so I
Mhm.
didn't trust them because I knew that
Absolutely.
they didn't think it was important. So that is my story.
Mhm.
I kind of chuckle when Brian was kind of leading us into this because I don't believe that it's I have to be in control, but there is this place where it's like, okay, you know how you want it done.
Mhm.
And so you're just like, okay, I'll give you an opportunity to get it done, whether it's my kids or, a team that I may be leading. But then you have to say, okay, especially with your kids, I'm teaching them, right? Of what it's going to
Mhm.
look like when you're in your own place. But that place where you're like, I got to do it because I want it done my way. I do believe that is wanting to have all the control.
Mhm.
But there can be a place where you just know there's a certain way that you want it done, and it's not the corner isn't perfect, or it's not placed in the right you know place, is off center. It really falls down to what is your motive, right? What's your motive behind I have to do it myself?
Mhm.
And so I've just followed through on some things for me personally to say, are you trying to be controlling? Does it just got to be Tresina's way and can't nobody else do it right? Or is it just that it needs to be done a certain way? And so I have to do self check always, 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 and realize that sometimes it's me. Sometimes it's me that I just wanted to be in control and have things done my way. But um, that's where the self-awareness piece comes in at Brian. And I love that that's constantly interwoven through all of these conversations, that we have to be self-aware.
Self-aware. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about this from the place of distrusting behaviors, that is probably the one thing that is difficult. If you're not self-aware, that you're not aware that your behaviors can be where people don't trust you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian,
So,
I've had a conversation with someone about the your motive, right?
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your
So
motive?
I'm gonna go even a little deeper on this one because Tristina brought up a good point. What is the intention behind it? Is it
Mhm.
to just be controlling, et cetera, et cetera? So that then brings upon another thought for me because one of the things that I do well is delegate. I delegate for two reasons. One is I gives the other person an opportunity to grow and learn, right? Which
Mhm.
is one of the biggest benefits to it. And then it also gives them a way to showcase what they know, not just to me, but to others, right? So it puts them on stage. So I like to delegate and give them that opportunity. So exactly here in this moment, I think that's a key component that we have to look at. And let's reel it back to say this is a relationship scenario where how is a person going to learn how you like things, how things should be to make it better if you never
Yeah,
give them the opportunity to do so because you just do it yourself anyway, right?
yeah.
So you end up boxing yourself in to this place of, actually discomfort because you're not allowing them to have the opportunity to try it, to grow and to learn. Because they can't just walk right into it and probably know out of the box. It may take a few tries, but you've got to give them the chance to have those few tries. So that's what I just wanted to share.
Good.
Sometimes we actually end up doing ourselves a disservice by holding it too close because we
Mhm.
don't give the other person the opportunity to try, to learn, and to grow. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great point. Great
yeah,
point.
yeah, it's a good one. But not necessarily one we like to talk about, but yeah, it is.
Yep.
So let's move on to the next one, which is one I don't even know who even want to open this whole can of worms, but it is what it is, and that is they avoid intimacy. Uh, and obviously, with intimacy, that brings vulnerability, which is the biggest factor within it from a trusting standpoint. Uh, and they avoid intimacy because they want to avoid vulnerability at all costs, right? But the key there again, and again, this is not just and an intimacy can be misused and misinterpreted too. So we're
Yeah.
not just talking about a romantic relationship, a significant other, that kind of thing. Intimacy can be best friends. It can be many different things because you're sharing things that are intimate or personal to you with that person, right? And because you're essentially going down a few levels in the onion on yourself when you share these things, you have to open yourself up, make yourself vulnerable to share some of those intimate thoughts, those intimate feelings that you may be having. And that's a key component, I think, to this and we've talked about vulnerability 1,000 times already. And so I think it's key that we keep repeating that self-awareness piece, and how to be self-aware, it does require vulnerability at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I view the word intimacy so that we don't always attach it to some romantic relationship, or where we or in marriage or something like that. It's just closely connected.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're closely connected, that person can see you,
Mm-hmm.
right? They can see you when you are close to someone, whether it's business or friendship. They can see you. And the reason I think many people avoid this is we all have flaws, but we are so careful that we don't want people to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because then you're going to challenge me. And I think that's the reason why it is so such a valuable piece in marriage, because that level of intimacy with and we're talking outside of the bedroom. We just mean that covenant, that closeness that you have with someone allows them to see you like no one else.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the person you should have valued the most when it comes to trust, that they can tell you about yourself and you not get offended, you not get mad, you don't try to shift the blame to them. But that is I think the one thing that makes us very distrusting is when we don't get close. And relationships are so important to me. I value people, I love people. So I don't do surface, right? I don't have time for it, really. But because relationships are so important, you're going to get close, and you may see some things about me that you don't like. Show me, tell me. I have done enough of the work that has been revealed and exposed that it's okay. You can tell me, because I know it about myself anyway. And if I have built that trust with you, then I know you mean me good when you share it. So I think when people avoid intimacy, being closely connected, because they don't want people to see their stuff, and then they don't want to be challenged with it, because then it requires change.
Mm.
That's a hard thing for
Not
people
that
who
word.
are ready.
Change.
Yeah.
I for the last 3 years, and you guys know, I have been a mentor of teen girls, and that has been the most vulnerable position, besides being a mother of teen and grown kids, that I have ever had in my life. I mean, because I can be a teacher, because between 8 and 4, I'm that person that I go home. But being a mentor, I am a mentor 24/7. I'm a mentor at 9:30 at night on the phone when something's wrong, or overnight at a sleepover, and we talking, just whatever happens between these walls happens between these walls. And for 3 years, 20 or plus girls have come into my life, and some have faded onto their own journey. Some are still in my life, but they have seen me in different situations. Now, granted, I thought I was here to see them, their situations. But what happened is we saw each other through our situations. And I've had deaths, and I've had moves, and I've had relationship situations, and I could not hide any of these things.
Yeah.
And I never even thought about, because life moves so fast, I never even thought about how I would hide it from them, because I knew I had to talk about it. And so I had to be transparent and vulnerable through these whole 3 years. And so what I've heard from them, and this is not a pat on the back for me, what I've heard from them is saying, what if you told Miss Bridgit or Miss Kinney, however they're addressing me, if you tell her something, it's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere unless it's going to harm you or other people. And she knows that she can trust us as well. But That's an intimate. Those are intimate relationships. Even the ones that have faded off into other, to another journey of their lives, they know that I'm still a phone call away. And you have to be vulnerable like that. And sometimes as parents, adults, mentors, teachers, we come into other lives that we're going to be the one that's going to be this hero that's going to rescue. And in turn, we learn that these people, put a imprint in our lives as well. So I've had to be vulnerable with them and show them, this is who I was. And I'm very transparent. If you're on my social media page, I'm very transparent about my life, my downs, my ups, all the flaws, all the things. I don't think I've hid anything. But I haven't given out everything. But in terms of my life on a surface, I have showed everything. And they appreciate that about me. And so they've never been scared to come to me. And so people trust you when you show up as your real self, and when you show up as a vulnerable person, and they know that you're your real self. They will trust you because they know, and it's freeing. I mean, vulnerability is an amazing place. I used to think it was a dark place, right? It was a hidden place, and that's where you go to hide. But it's so freeing, and people want to join you in that place, and they can be free as well. And so that's what I found out over these last 3 years. I have found out so much about myself in these last 3 years. Just being in that space as a mentor that I thought everybody's going to find out about themselves. But that's my piece on being vulnerable. This is a very freeing place.
Yep. Yeah, I want to chime in on that in a little bit different way. Because as I look at that and I talk about, vulnerability, and Tressena, I love the way, you talk about the closeness. That's really what it's about, right? Close relationships. And I also look at the vulnerability and say that is probably one of the best ways to learn about, gain perspective on self-trust. What's going on within you is you have to open up that can of vulnerability for yourself and expose it, because that's where the true knowledge and the learning and the growth is going to come from within you, from a self-trust standpoint. Bridgit, I know earlier you mentioned talking about there was a period in your life where you really had to uh, change in a way from the standpoint of, because you felt some of the decisions you had made in the past were not the best decisions. So now you were kind of in this paralyzed state because I shouldn't be making decisions anymore because obviously I don't make good ones, right? But the vulnerability and working your way through that, getting back to a place of self-trust so that you could start to be more comfortable and having to make the decisions that we all have to make in life, because that's a part of life. So this is a key part, and vulnerability is a big driver for the self-trust piece.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's move on to the last couple here. One of the things that comes up quite a bit when we're talking about trust is going to be looking at commitment, right? So avoiding commitment. And again, very broad word, and we're not specifically talking about commitment for relationships. It could be jobs, it could be family, it could be friends, it could be careers, many, many different ways that commitment can play into your life, and just avoiding the whole thing of being committed to anything, because A, it requires trust, B, it requires vulnerability. And I just want to share two things associated with that from my chair first. One is accountability, right? Because commitment, and if there's a direct word that equates to it, it's usually the accountability piece that most people struggle with. Because once you commit to something, it's like, oh crap, now I'm accountable to whatever I committed to, whatever that might be, right? So they have to reconcile that in whatever terms and ways and fashions it happens in their life. Then I want to kind of jog back to something I brought up earlier when we were talking about, I think I was talking about my firewall or filter, this kind of thing. We're in that part of the discussion. And I talked about certainty versus uncertainty. And that also has a lot to do with what you commit to and choose not to commit to, is your level of certainty or uncertainty with whatever the situation or person may be, right? If it's something and you feel comfortable, you feel fairly certain that you can manage it, it's the right place for you, it's the right thing for you. If that's what your instincts are telling you, et cetera, you're more likely to follow through and accept that commitment. If you're more on the uncertainty side of things, then most likely you're not going to uh, take that leap of faith and take that commitment. So starting to understand that there is this slider that we have in our lives about certainty versus uncertainty, and realizing that, and then kind of determining, where you are on it in a certain situation, and then start to work on maybe where you need to get to with that particular thing to get it to be more certain, so you feel more comfortable. Because again, it's all about the self-awareness and the growth that comes from taking those steps.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Any other thoughts on commitment?
No.
Right.
I will share when it comes to commitment. The first thing that I really think about, Bryan, and it's kind of along with what you said, accountability. There's an expectation that comes when you
Mhm.
commit.
Mhm.
And I don't know how I feel about this statement when people say you shouldn't expect anything. Like, have y'all heard that?
Yeah.
That in certain situations, if you don't expect anything, you won't be disappointed. I don't
Mhm.
understand that thought, because when you commit to anything, there comes an expectation that you're gonna show up to that commitment. And I don't know where that originated from. I've seen it in several places, and I'm like, commitment says I can trust that you're going to do what you said you were going to do, right? That commitment, when you make that commitment, I
Mhm.
can sit back and say, okay, I'm good, because they've committed to this. Um, I will tell you, and I want to make this real, I think, important point, because I'm listening as a mother to my kids, especially my boys. Marriage is a commitment,
Mhm.
and when their father decided to leave, they struggled with
Mhm.
the level of commitment that he was not making to them.
Mhm.
And so when you think about the word commitment, and I think we can all relate to this, because sometimes that word commitment can be kind of dismissed because we don't want to commit to some things. But this really brings it, I think, to the core of who we are in our relationships, our interactions. And so when my boys are like asking why did he not hold to his commitment to them? We don't have to talk about the marriage point, but to them, what I have learned with this word commitment is, just like Bryan said, there's a level of accountability that comes, that when we shy away from the commitments that we made, it does breed not discontent, but this distrust.
Mhm.
And so now I'm having, and my boys are teens and preteens now. So I'm having to work through what commitment looks like when a man shows up. Because now I can't teach them how to be a man, but I can teach them manhood principles.
Right.
And so
Right.
I'm trying to teach them what commitment looks like for them, right? When they're having the hard conversation or having the conversations with me that I feel like are kind of hard, I'm like, well, honey, this is what commitment will look like for you. The way someone else showed up with that is going to be different. And the reason I think that is so important is because, we always think commitment when it comes to relationships, right? With the opposite sex or somebody we're in love with. However, the commitment that we make in life to just show up in whatever role we have is so vitally important. And so I don't think we've spent enough time looking at how trust and commitment are so parallel and so important in all of our connections with people in whatever part. So this is one that really touches me, because now I have this huge burden and responsibility to say, I have to make sure that what I said I'm going to show up for, that I'm showing up for. And so
Yeah.
commitment is something that um, we have to say is going to be important and valued in our relationships and our connections, because we do life with people, right? And they need to be able to trust that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Could not agree more. So the last bullet point talks about, you're very suspicious of others. And that really kind of ties back to what we've talked about before, because the first one was you anticipate betrayal and
Mm-hmm.
you always see the negative. So those two are really tied together. So,
Very
Yeah.
right.
uh,
Very.
no need to really rehash that. So we'll
Yeah.
move on to the next slide. And this is where we start to talk about the benefits of trusting, right? Bridget, you want to run through that real quick for us?
Benefits of trusting. Um, the rainbow part. You also become someone to trust. It builds self-confidence. It connects you to others. It reduces the feeling of loneliness, and it creates vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I mean, it's all of those for me. Um, Self-confidence. When I learned to trust myself, being self-aware, it was okay for me to trust others because then I knew who I could trust. I made the decisions now I made was coming from a self-aware place. So it gave me the confidence to trust others.
Mm-hmm.
And in turn, it connected me to others. So all of these connect each other to, it connects, and it does reduce the feeling of loneliness because the draining part of being suspicious of others and always thinking the negative is that you always distance yourself from people.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be lonely, and you're going to always feel lonely. You're going to always feel like people don't want to be around you, and you're going to always feel like you don't want to be around people.
Mm-hmm.
And you're always going to have your wall up, so you're never going to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And so the benefit of trusting is all of those above.
Agreed. Absolutely agree. Yeah, for me, the ones that really jump out are, as you said, the connecting you with others is an
Mm-hmm.
important, and getting past the loneliness piece, because you do have to open yourself up and be vulnerable as the last bullet point. And and total, probably for a lot of people, the juxtapose of that position to say this is a benefit, but it's vulnerability, because it's like, whoa, wait, that's a benefit to me, because most people don't want to be vulnerable. But
Yeah.
we've been preaching that all day, and that's a key component of it, is you do have to open yourself up to truly be able to trust, not only within yourself, but definitely within others and other situations. So it's a very key component to it.
Yeah.
Something just popped in my head, and I thought, and I need to say it. When people talk now in conversation, they'll say, "I'm gonna be very vulnerable. I'm gonna be very transparent." So now that's the thing that we say now before we open up a conversation. So what if we normalize that when we don't have to make that disclaimer first? Or
Right.
that's a normal thing now. Be vulnerable or to be transparent. So, because we make that disclaimer, I'm gonna be transparent, so everybody move in. Instead of we just normalize being vulnerable, so it shows up all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it just that was just a thought. Go ahead.
No,
Just say,
no, that's a great point, though. It's like the old statement about somebody said, "May I speak freely?" And it's like, well, what have you been doing the rest of the time, right? I mean,
hey,
so, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I would just add that the part about connecting to others. When we do life with other people.
yeah.
And so you have to find a place where trust is something that you value. You hold it near and dear because it allows you to connect to others. If you're a distrusting person, whether it's with yourself or other people, it's going to make it difficult to connect. And so that's where we have to find a place. Okay, we do life with each other, the way we show up in whatever, places. So,
Hmm.
we value that part of it
absolutely.
always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. Well, let's bring this home. We've been on quite a while today, and so I'm going to bring it back and get to the last slide here for today, which is our question of the day. And I'll let the ladies answer first, and I'll summarize at the end here. So, question of the day: what element of trust did you learn today that you had never thought about before, and how will you use it?
I will say I'm still learning how to not feel like I have to do everything.
Mhm.
Everything is broad for me. I never thought about it the way Tressena presented it. But it for me, broad means it could be phone calls and getting people together, volunteering to do something, and it may be a controlling piece to that. I never really thought about it that way. That it's not that I just didn't trust people; I just wanted it done a certain way.
Hmm.
And so I am still learning how to not feel like I have to do it do everything just because I want it a certain way. It don't have to be that way. And so that is something I'm working on.
Okay, thanks, Bridgit. Tressena, what about you?
I would say the element of trust that I learned today really came from the self-awareness piece. I never thought about it being self-aware, but I always thought my decision making, my ability to make good decisions, when I said I didn't trust myself, came from what I felt like was I just didn't know certain things. But the self awareness piece says, but what about you that you didn't consider needed to show up so you could make those decisions, and then trust that you did it the correct way. So I'm really gonna start looking at that a little bit more, and see how I can maybe even go back and learn from some of my past experiences and bring that forward with me, that whole self-awareness piece and trust.
Very
Awesome. Awesome. So for me, it was when we were discussing, kind of going back to the whole firewall filter part, and then the question was, was that intentional? Did I do that intentionally? And my answer at that time was yes. But that brought forth a realization for me. And that realization is that, and what I'm trying to do with the VOV network and et cetera, that the whole point of it is to make an impact and make a difference, right? So the more people that I can uh, have that impact and be that difference maker for is going to be what's going to be most beneficial for me personally, because that's the mission that I'm on,
Yeah.
which then means I actually need to open that filter up some more, because the only way you're going to reach more people is to allow them, as we talked about, from a closeness relationship or intimacy or whatever term you want to use. So that's a takeaway for me, is to reevaluate that and then figure out a way to rework that so that I can be more open and be, I guess, just more uh, vulnerable and accepting and available, because that's really where it's going to make the true difference for me and having the impact that I want to have.
Mhm.
very good.
Yeah. So that's my takeaway for today. Final thoughts before we wrap up and end this for today.
Very great topic, because I can see that because it has been very lengthy. I hope you got a piece of this. Really good. It resonated with us, so that I know that the audience that listened, it resonated with them at some point.
Yeah.
I would just say my final thoughts is that, when you weave trust through all of your connections and relationships, we need to find more value in that, and then do the work that
Mm,
extends from that. Because it's like I said before, with the emotion part, is too weighty of a thing to attach to an emotion. So we
Mhm.
have to be consciously aware of what it takes for us to be in trusting relationships.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No doubt. This was great. I really appreciate the time this morning and what we shared. I think we all learned something, and I think we all shared some
Mhm.
things that other people will learn from. So, for our audience out there, thank you so much for joining us. Again, trust is a foundational piece, and that's why we wanted to end the 5 T's on this particular one, because it really is the last part of that piece that can really start to take you over from a transparency, truth, and trust standpoint. Tie those 3 things together in your life, it will absolutely make a difference. And so,
transforming at its best. Transforming at its best.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So until next time, I want to thank everyone and take care. Take care of each other. We'll definitely see you soon.
Bye bye.